I warned you last week that you are in store for a good couple months of some unpleasant reflections on humanity, and I'm not going to disappoint you this morning as we are looking at the descent of man. Okay, and as we think about what is going on in Romans chapter 1 at this point, I will repeat verse 18 from last week as we look at the broader passage this morning of verses 19 through 23. But I do want to remind you, especially of what last week brought about, which was an awareness, I trust, for you as you listened, as you reflected and meditated on Scripture, that, okay, here's what happened, here's what sin does. Sin is this thing that it is this preference for something other than God in the place of God, and it works in my heart in such a way that it tries to push truth that is very clear, very obvious away in order to sustain its own existence. So that was verse 18 last week, and now we'll see how Paul, and I do want you to pay particular attention this morning to the use of connecting words, okay? There are connecting words that are utilized by Paul in the vast majority of his writings, okay? They're very important, okay? You think, what's the conjunction, junction, what's your function? For those who are old like me, you'll probably remember a little more, but you have conjunctions, things that are tying things together, and Paul uses together words. He ties thoughts together, and this morning I trust you will see, verses 19 through 23, how he is going to do this for us. So I would have you pay attention to the fact Paul is making an argument. Okay, and perhaps you've not thought of Scripture that way before, that Scripture is something that is written in literary forms, and Paul is making arguments here. All right, he is using language in order to help us understand something. These are not just thoughts abstracted so that we look at, okay, this sounds like an idea, right? Here's an idea, and let's take this idea. Paul is establishing statements, and he is grounding statements in assumptions and assertions and facts, and this is how we find the book of Romans in chapter 1 especially laying out for us. So the terrible exchange, that's going to be the title of the message this morning. I was freshly reminded the other day, I was reading The Magician's Nephew from the Chronicles of Narnia. Anybody like The Magician's Nephew? Please put your hand up if you like it. Thank you. Wonderful. This is exciting. I'm glad that you like it. The Magician's Nephew is the first book chronologically in the Chronicles of Narnia. The Magician's Nephew is fantastic because it gives this insight, this literary insight, this fictional insight into how a world comes into being and how there's this entrant, all right, Jadis, terrible Jadis, right? Jadis, the White Witch, the Queen of Winter, and Jadis is awakened by Diggory, who gets a little bit curious, and he strikes this bell, and Jadis wakes up. And there's something called the intolerable word that the chapter is titled. I thought, okay, there's something terrible happening in Magician's Nephew. Something is being awakened that is not good at all. And in Romans 1:19 through 23, we see the Apostle Paul helping us come to terms with the fact that something very not good has occurred in history. Something very not good has occurred, and we'll call it the terrible exchange. So I wanted to work intolerable in. C.S. Lewis would not be able to sue me for that, but we're going to go with terrible, okay? Terrible exchange, because what we find in verses, particularly 22 and 23, help us see that a very terrible exchange has occurred. Now, I'll read that for us, and I will ask you to consider what that exchange may be. So starting in verse 18, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who, by their unrighteousness, suppress the truth." Remember last week, it's unrighteousness doesn't want to be found out, and so something could be plain as day. I'm going to push it away. Just push it away. We'll see that a little bit more this morning because, again, this is an argument, and it traces a flow of thought. So that's what we're doing. We're tracing a flow of thought. Now, start in verse 19, where we'll be today especially. "What can be known about God is plain to them." So for the wrath of God. Now, for what can be known about God, all right, so we have this, and then there's a because, all right? Think of for as a because statement. Because, and then because what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For, or another because, his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived. Right, now, these are important words for you to consider when you think, okay, I know that there are people on Reddit who have very confident assertions that there is no God. Okay, maybe you have dwelt in the sewer of Reddit and you have heard people's lovely argumentation as to why there is no God. Okay, maybe if you're a little older, you saw interviews on the PBS or CNN or a number of things. Yes, and here is a very clear reason why this should not be the case. You have a Christopher Hitchens, a Richard Dawkins, or a Sam Harris, and a number of the, quote, new atheists who made these strident claims saying that there is no God. And yet Paul says here that the truth that there is a God is clearly perceived. Now, I want you to think as we go through this morning how you can square with that, because if you have a guy like Christopher Hitchens, who was a very intelligent man, it's like, oh, well, can Hitchens, could he not perceive this? Was this not clear to Christopher Hitchens? And I think as what Paul says here plays out, you'll understand maybe it was perceived. Maybe it was perceived clearly, but he didn't like what it meant. Perhaps the argumentation of one who will come before you and say, oh, well, there's no God, and you should listen to what I have to say, and here are the reasons why. It sounds very intelligent. Perhaps the reasoning, the rationale, isn't necessarily so much based in logic or fact, but has more to do with what somebody wants. Right, more to do with desire. Because you think about this, if there is no God, what would it mean for you? Right, apart from being completely dissembled because you can't keep yourself being. But when you think about the moral consequences and the obligations that you have and responsibilities, what is it that an absence of God would mean for you? It would mean that you could do what? Anything. Anything you want. Right? Gloves are off, no holds barred, do as you will, as long as you don't get caught. Because the big concern is that there is a God who is powerful, and that's what Paul is arguing here, that there is a God who is clearly perceived in his power, right? He has these invisible attributes. We're not talking here necessarily about what is revealed in Christ or throughout the course of redemptive history, but just by somebody waking up in the morning, looking outside and saying, there's a really big place here. And it didn't just happen. There's design, there's order. There must be something intelligent behind this. There must be something powerful behind this. And if it is that intelligent, it is that powerful, then what do I have to do with it? Well, more powerful than me, more intelligent than me, that means that I have to come to terms with this and war against it. So I want to push this away in order to do what I want. So Paul says, his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So yes, we're taking this back to Genesis, right? You thought that we escaped Genesis after a year and a half. You are wrong. We're going back to Genesis again. They're without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. But they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. So this word futile, think futility. What is futility? Imagery we have from Solomon in Ecclesiastes is chasing after wind, right? That's futile, right? Imagine like you're not going to find somebody who's so sociopathic they're going to look and chase wind, right? They're just going to like, oh, run after wind. That's crazy. But think about what it might mean for you if you have a kite, and let's say you get a kite from the Walmart, and it's I'm going to go and I'm going to fly my kite. And what it is for you to be out in the field and look for the wind and chase after the wind, it's like, I'm going to find it and then it goes away. Right? How futile would it be for you to think you could capture it? How futile would it be for you to think that somehow you can harness this, like, okay, yes, the wind is in my power. That's the imagery that Solomon uses, futility of living a life apart from the fear of God. And Paul is saying, look, this thinking, this suppressing of the truth out of a love for something in the place of God, this is futile, all right? It's just dumb. It's futile thinking. Because of it, their foolish hearts were darkened. So you think, what's the course? What's the path that this is taking? Futility of thought, I'm going to press away, press away, press away. And then in the process, this right here, this organ, this heart, it gets darker and darker and darker, as in the pursuit of the sin that suppresses the truth leads to greater futility, and so on it goes. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Now, I will caution you against the hubris that says, well, I haven't made a totem pole. Okay, and lest we think that we are above this fashioning of images to worship in the place of God. This weekend, I was praying about some things and trying to come to terms with some junk in my own heart, issues that I just, idolatry of the heart. And here's why it's idolatry of the heart. Because for me, I was thinking about what do I seek quite often? It's the praise of other people. Okay, I seek the praise of other people quite often. I like people telling me you did a good job. I like people telling me you're worth something. Now, it's not bad for you to hear those things, but for me, that's a chase, right? That I want this. And God has been so gracious to me over the years to prevent me from getting it at times. But the reality is, when you think about the images that are being spoken of here, what is a human being, biblically speaking? It is an image bearer of God. And so if you're chasing the applause, the praise of people, you are indeed chasing the praise of an image. So please don't put yourself in a position where you think that somehow because a totem pole does not exist in your living room, that you are exempt from this indictment that says you, human being, in your sinfulness and your fallenness, that you will prefer things in the place of God that we can rightly call idols. Something we're worshiping in the place of God, even if it's people. So here is your big idea. Here's your big idea for the morning. Write it down, take a picture, whatever you want to do with it. The guilt known for the love of created things in the place of God. So this means is there's a guilt that when you know there's a God who is perfect and holy and righteous, and when you know you have lost step through, you think about you done messed up, you did something wrong, and you preferred this instead of this. We feel guilt. We call this our conscience. So the guilt known for the love of created things in the place of God is the occasion for searching out every creative reason to dismiss the glory of God as the greatest good of humanity. So we feel, as how this works, right? Last week, the suppression system of sin kicks in. But as this argument flows further, what we're hearing from Paul is, now here's what goes on. Suppression of truth occurs, and we feel guilt, right? He says that we're without excuse when we sin. Okay? When we sin, when we violate what we know to be good and right, because God has built something into us, He's built a conscience into us as image bearers who, even in a broken image state, apart from the redemption that comes through Christ, we know there's something there. And so we feel guilt. We feel guilt. This is why people will make images, that they will make altars to gods. It's because they want to assuage their guilt and come to some sense of inner peace. Like, okay, I'm good enough. But what Paul is telling us here is that this guilt over the exchange, right? This terrible exchange of things that are eternal and glorious in the glory of God for things that are created. This guilt pushes us into looking for creative reasons to deny what is patently obvious. Okay, what is patently obvious? Something as simple as looking outside and believing that order came from disorder on its own. That might seem like a very basic statement to make, and like that would not hold up under some sort of philosophical scrutiny. But the reality is, if you look outside and you perceive order, you're perceiving order because order exists. And it is absolute foolishness to suggest that order came from disorder on its own. Right? You can't get a Rembrandt by throwing paint on the ground and expecting it to assemble itself. You can't do that. There is design, there is intricacy, there is detail. So something is patently obvious is the fact that looking outside, it tells us that God is great, He's wise, He is powerful. We're going to find every creative reason to say, nope, that's that's come up with an alternative explanation. And that's been the course of human history. Now, it's obvious. Verses 19 through 20 again, for what can be known about God is plain to them, right? So Paul is making a statement. This is plain, okay? He's not trying to argue from any type of, here's why you should believe that there is a God. He's saying that if you really give yourself a moment of honesty, you will acknowledge there is something that's not you. Okay, now throughout history, people have called it a number of things. But the reality is that people know there is something that is bigger. And it's not something bigger that is creative. Right? Not something bigger that's created. There's something bigger that created. What can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. So God has mercifully said, I'm here. Right? He's mercifully disclosed himself in the created order, not savingly, but in order to give a witness to those who have even rebelled against him, that they've rebelled against God, not against a social order, not against their own sense of right or wrong. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. So the created order clearly witnesses to a God who is over and before all finite things. Okay? So define terms. What is a finite thing? A finite thing is something that is quantifiable, that is measurable. So a finite thing would be, let's go and we can find something that has dimensions to it, okay? And if it has dimensions to it, that means that that thing has boundaries that have been set for it. And so the created order, we call it the created order because it is created, it has boundaries, there's definition. And we look at it and we see, okay, there's the tree is not a rock, and the rock is not a bird. There's definition, there's boundary here. There's finitude that's attached to this because we can trace the boundaries. We can look and figure out, okay, this is this. It's quantifiable. It has a beginning and or it has an end. And the created order witnesses to a fact that there's a God who is before and over all these things. Acts chapter 17, the Apostle Paul was hanging out with some people who were very, very self-assured that they had arrived at conclusions or were arriving at conclusions regarding spiritual matters, philosophical issues, and he's talking to these people who are sitting around, right? And they are, we'll call them Redditors in the first century, who they've got ideas, and these ideas are being bandied about, and it's the Areopagus in Athens. And Paul goes, and as his desire was to communicate the glory of Christ who redeems sinful people out of their idolatry, he goes and he speaks to them. And in their perceived spirituality, he speaks. This is what occurs. Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious." Now, whether this is tongue-in-cheek or whether this is just literally he's observing this, the reality is he is giving them some sort of credit to say, you know there's something, right? You know there's something that's not you. You know there's something that is above you. As I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, "To the unknown God." So there's this plethora, this is a wide number of deities that were worshipped, and even to the point where they put up this, like, whatever form you want to give it, this statue, this place that says, "To the unknown God." So if we missed anything, let's give some credit where we don't know. What therefore you worship is unknown. This I proclaim to you. Right? Because the Lord is not represented among this pantheon of worship. The Lord is not represented there because the Lord, who is the God of Scripture, the God of the Old and New Testaments, this God is not like the gods of the nations, right? You cannot carve an image of him. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. So you want to use your brains, you want to think through this, you want to rationalize what's happening here. Paul is saying, look, isn't it silly that you would believe that a God requires something from you? Wouldn't that be a silly thing? Wouldn't it be a strange thing that a God, a deity, would be dependent upon created order? It doesn't seem like a God to me. Sounds like something that we're putting in the place of God that has perhaps divine attributes, but certainly not a God who is over and above all things. This makes no sense for us to say that there's contingency. Like this God is contingent. Like he depends upon me. Paul says that's not the God who is. Psalm 50, verses 7 through 11, the psalmist says, "Hear, O my people, and I will speak, O Israel, I will testify against you. I am God, your God. Not for your sacrifices do I rebuke you. Your burnt offerings are continually before me. I will not accept a bull from your house or goats from your folds, for every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the hills, and all that moves in the field is mine." So, as God is addressing the people here who have a history of trying to hybridize and merge together the worship of the Lord with the worship of idols in the nations around them, he's saying, look, my problem with you people is not that you're irreligious. My problem is that you conceive of me as a God who is dependent upon the things I have made. Again, this just seemed very just foolish, very silly to you. Like how is it that a God would be dependent upon you? That's not a God worthy of worship. In Job chapter 38, as Job is having his issues, and as he is bearing up under significant burdens of suffering, he is interacting with some friends and then a young man named Elihu, and Elihu points him in the right direction, but Job starts getting kind of tired of his own obedience here, and he starts desponding a little bit more, and he's like, oh man, if I could have a face-to-face with God, maybe you've had a conversation with somebody where they've said, if I could say a thing or two to God and just tell him how it ought to be, then everything, I'd put him in his place. And that almost happens here between Job and the Lord. And Job is this God-honoring man. He loves the Lord, but there is a problem in his heart as he is trying to deal with the reality of his suffering, as he's asking these questions, and he's trying to come to terms with the fact that this God who is over and above all things, that somehow there's things happening that he doesn't seem to like very much. And so he is trying to have this face-to-face. He's trying to have this encounter with God, and here is what is recorded. And then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it?" So the question is being asked of Job here, saying, all right, who do you think I am? Job, who do you think I am? Am I a God who is manipulated by you? Am I a God who is easily just kind of molded and formed and shaped as though somehow I'm just like the rest of you? Or am I different than that? Right, when we think about the word holy means set apart. God is holy, right? 3 times over we find the seraphim singing of God. He is holy, 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 as Isaiah has this vision of the Lord in the temple, and he is set apart. He is above all. He is not like you. Now, you were created in his image. You were created for an eternity of fellowship with him. As a human being, this is what humanity is created for, to glorify him and to enjoy him forever. However, sin has complicated this severely. But he is not like us in that you are finite. Right? You had a beginning point. There was a time in history in which you were not. But there has never been a time where God was not. He has always been and he always will be. This is why one of the most profound statements you find in the entire Bible, and you hold this against the portrayals of different deities throughout world religions, and you think, who is God revealed to be in the book of Exodus? You think, oh, well, this is a book that talks about the fables and mythology of a people and the parting of a Red Sea and a bush that doesn't get consumed with fire. How goofy are these people? But you think with the profundity of what this statement regarding God's identity is when Moses meets the Lord in the burning bush, and he says, "Who are you?" And the response in this supposedly ignorant Bronze Age era, God says, "I am." You just think what a profound statement that is. God says, "I am. I am." You want to know what being is? It's me. I don't depend upon you. Everything that is created, I created, and I created it for my glory. I am. If you want to know who I am, know me as the God who is above all, who is holy, who is glorious, who is supreme, who is worthy of all worship, and his manifold perfections. So Paul says, we have an idea that there is something that's not us. But then when we perceive this, we think, okay, we know this to be true, but I like what I'm doing. I don't like the idea that somebody would stand in my way. What happens? Verse 21, for although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. So we know this to be true. We know that there is a God who is. We know that this God is worthy of all worship and deserving of all glory, but we have a problem with that. Because what we don't want to do in our fallen state, right? Our fallen state, we don't want to look to him and acknowledge that he is the source. We don't want to look to him and say, yeah, you're worthy of it, and I'm not. Right? You see this in how self-exaltation in cultures throughout history has operated. You think, what is the common theme? Is that when people gain power and wealth, it's not so that power and wealth can be stored away somewhere, away from the perception of other people. It's so that the power and wealth can be this resounding thing that just says, you're great. You're great. Put the name on it, right? You're wonderful. So we want this for ourselves. And if we know there's a God who is, we're going to do everything we can in order to switch this around. So there's this collision course that takes place. The preference for other things in the place of God is the essence of folly. It is the essence of foolishness. You want to think about what is the dumbest thing in the entire world you could do is to say, I would rather exchange the glory of the immortal God for something else. Right? You want to think the dumbest thing you could ever do, hands down, eternal good, eternal righteousness, eternal perfection, eternal glory, eternal weightiness, and fun. And women. And makeup. Just fill in the blank. This is dumb. It's absolutely dumb. But this is the futility. Right? Here's the futility. When we encounter this truth about God in our hearts as human beings, we just don't like the idea that what we prefer would be pushed back against. And so we want to make something else, basically. We want to prefer it, and we want to justify it. So what do? Psalm 115, verses 4 through 8. Here's how the psalmist addresses what goes on, right? What is it to make an idol? What is it to fashion something to be worshipped in the place of God? The psalmist says their idols are silver and gold, the work of human hands. All right, so you think, let's find some sparkly stuff. Let's find some shiny stuff. Right? We're not going to make a god necessarily out of granite unless it's a big granite god. We're gonna find sparkly things, nice things, things that are valuable. That seems to fit what worship is. Their idols are silver and gold, the work of human hands. So this is where it gets weird, right? Because something that was a piece of ore in the ground, you've now worked it. It's like, now it's pretty. That's where they worship. What changed? They have mouths but do not speak, eyes but do not see. They have ears but do not hear, noses but do not smell. They have hands but do not feel, feet but do not walk, and they do not make a sound in their throat. Those who make them become like them, so do all who trust in them. So here's the foolishness. Here's the just the dumb exchange. What's the most ridiculous of exchanges? Let's take something that looks like it should talk, that looks like it should walk, that looks like it should see, looks like it should hear. It doesn't do any of those things. And then let's say, this is worthy of my worship. The psalmist says, you're going to become like this. There's a book by Greg Beale, I think it's called We Become What We Worship. It's a book I would have loved to have read years ago, but it's still in my office. The premise, however, is based on this. Become like what you worship. So you think, what happens when somebody is chasing, right? You're chasing an object of worship. You're going to pattern your life around it. And it becomes to the point where you can become so consumed that everything else just seems to slough off. And your life is now marked by something in this very gross caricature, this exaggeration of something. Think how it might happen for us culturally today, the pursuit of money. Think what might happen in a workplace where let's say a guy starts out, he's married, it's like, I got a new job. It's a career job. And this career job gives me opportunities, right? So this career job gives me opportunities, and I'm happy at home, and we come home and play board games, whatever. And then this career job comes, and like, but you know what? I love the idea of having some more money. I love the idea of having money. And in the love of money, in the love of this pursuit, these other things that matter start getting pushed out. Right, so this love of something, and then over time, this thing it becomes this gross thing lodged in the heart where it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what goes on around this man, because whether it's his children, whether it's his wife, whether it's time away with his parents, whatever it might be, it just gets all pushed away. All pushed away. And his entire life is consumed by this. And the psalmist says, look, if you're going to chase after an idol, you're going to become like that idol. Your life will be tailored around that idol. Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 18, the Lord speaking through Habakkuk says, what profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it, a metal image, a teacher of lies? For its maker trusts in his own creation when he makes speechless idols. Right? Just think, how really goofy is this? You choose something that's valuable to you. You choose something that's worth your attention, your affection, your heart, and you choose this thing, and you trust in your own creation. Yeah, I like this. I like this. And then it goes away, and what happens? The identity is completely obliterated. This thing that you made, which can go away, which does go away, is gone. And so what you've created, the trust, it just vanishes. Right? You can't have trust in something that has failed, ultimately. Isaiah chapter 44, here is the longer description from Isaiah as he's dealing with a people, idolatrous people, right? The people of Judah. The reason why Isaiah is speaking to them at this point is because they had decided they are going to worship other gods, and they'll include God, the God who is, among this host of other gods, but we really want to make sure we're hedging our bets and getting the best bang for our buck with worship. And so the Lord is addressing them and saying, you guys, this is messed up. Let me tell you how messed up this is, effectively, is what's being communicated here. All who fashion idols are nothing, and the things they delight in do not profit. Their witnesses neither see nor know, that they may be put to shame. Who fashions a god or casts an idol that is profitable for nothing? Behold, all his companions shall be put to shame, and the craftsmen are only human. Let them all assemble. Let them stand forth. They shall be terrified. They shall be put to shame together. The ironsmith takes a cutting tool and works it over the coals. He fashions it with hammers and works it with his strong arm. It becomes hungry and his strength fails. He drinks no water and is faint. The carpenter stretches a line. He marks it out with a pencil. Right? You think, what's happening? These guys are busy at work making these things, saying, it's gonna work. If I have this in front of me, I worship this, this is going to work. This is going to bring me everything that I want. It's going to satisfy me. There's glory in this to be had. I'm going to make this myself. I'll do this, and it's going to work. Carpenter stretches a line. He marks it out with a pencil. He shapes it with planes and marks it with a compass. He shapes it into the figure of a man with the beauty of a man to dwell in a house. He cuts down cedars, or he chooses a cypress tree or an oak and lets it grow strong among the trees of the forest. He plants a cedar and the rain nourishes it. Then it becomes fuel for a man. He takes a part of it and warms himself. He kindles a fire and bakes bread. Also, he makes a god and worships it. He makes it an idol and falls down before it. Half of it he burns in the fire. Over the half he eats meat. He roasts it and is satisfied. Also, he warms himself and says, "Aha, I'm warm. I have seen the fire." And the rest of it he makes into a god, his idol. Falls down to it and worships it. He prays to it and says, "Deliver me, for you are my God." They know not, nor do they discern, for he has shut their eyes, so that they cannot see, and their hearts they cannot understand. No one considers, nor is there knowledge of discernment to say, "Half of it I burn in the fire. I also baked bread on its coals. I roasted meat and have eaten, and shall I make the rest of it an abomination? Shall I fall down before a block of wood?" He feeds on ashes. A deluded heart has led him astray. And he cannot deliver himself or say, "Is there not a lie in my right hand?" So this might seem like this seems crazy, right? Why would you do this? Like you think you go chop down, right? A lot of us back a month or two, whenever it was, we had this storm with ice, and the ice accumulates on the trees, and your trees are crashing down in the backyard, okay? And so when that happened for us, we had this horrific box elder. I don't like box elders. They just grow and grow and grow, and they grew enough where this ice accumulates on it. It comes crashing down, destroys a lilac bush. Very, very big bummer. This happens, but I go out there with my DeWalt chainsaw, and I'm sawing this sucker down. And absolutely crazy is to think, you know what? Have an idea. I'm going to save half of this to worship. Half of it, let's have bonfire this summer, let the wood dry out, but half of it, I've got an idea. I'm going to bring it inside to the kids, and I'm going to say, all your wildest dreams will come true. Just give me a few days, and I'm going to work this over, and I'm going to make it look really pretty. It's going to be right in front of you, and you're going to love it, and it's going to satisfy all of your desires. Just give me a few days. Right? Now, the other week, I was standing in the yard as this obnoxious, invasive tree. But the insanity of idolatry is to say, let's look at the created things, and let's believe that this is capable of satisfying me more than the God who created me. And the reason why we do this is because the things that are promised, the things that sin promises. You go back to Genesis 3, and what is the promise that's laid before our first parents? It is, you will be like God, right? You can determine for yourself what's good or evil. You make that determination. You do this. You make the decision. It's not on God's shoulders. It's on yours. You can do this for yourself and say what is right and say what is wrong. That's up to you. And because this is it's now born into the human heart from birth, right? We're conceived. Our desire is for what we want. This is why you teach children to obey. You don't teach them to disobey, because inside all of our hearts is this, I want this. I want what I want. And because the God who is will not accommodate that, right? He will not accommodate being put in a subservient position, then we've got to do something. We've got to do something that's going to satisfy our sense of religiosity. We have to do something that's going to satisfy our sense of morality. So let's create another God. And however foolish it might seem, this is the futility Paul is talking about, however foolish it might seem, let's cut down a tree and worship it. At least it's going to potentially give me what I want. And this is how the human heart operates. So ultimately, we're going to go to this preferring glories. I want glory concept to be something that is in your minds as we finish this, because we do want to recognize that the chief end for which you were created is the glory of God, right? And we're going to see how Jesus brings glory into the picture here as he shows up. Verses 22 and 23 in Romans 1 again, claiming to be wise, they became fools. Not a good title. You don't be a fool. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images, resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. All right, so claiming to be wise, they became fools. Just think about this now. We have Paul's established this argument. He said, these things are patently obvious. They're clear. They're clearly perceived since the creation of the world, right? There is a God who is glorious and great. And in an effort to justify our continued pursuit of things that put us in a position of deification, we want to become the God. We're not satisfied with being created in his image. We want to become God. What we've done is we've decided let's find creative ways. Let's find creative ways to somehow push him out of our minds and put something else in his place. And so Paul says that this is now the mark of how this works. And say, claiming to be wise, they became fools. Claiming to be wise. Next time you hear somebody making an assertion that tries to push out the truth of God's existence, think, you're claiming to be wise, but I know what you're doing. You're claiming to be wise, but I know what you're really doing. What you're doing is you're trying to get away from an accountability to somebody who is bigger than you. You are trying to get away from it. Instead, what you're trying to do is you're trying to establish for yourself that you're right. How could you be wrong? How could the thing that you want be wrong? Somebody needs to justify this. Somebody needs to. And I'm going to try to look really smart in the process. Ultimately, though, you exchange glories. You exchange the glory of the immortal God for a picture of a horse. So the bankruptcy of sin is found in its preference for false glory over that for which we were created. Okay, so you think you were created for the glory of God. This is what, in the beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth. He creates humanity in his image after his likeness. And we've decided, no, there's preferable glory elsewhere. Preferable glory elsewhere. And the sin is bankrupt because what we're doing is we're saying, God's glory, not worth it. Exodus chapter 32, verses 1 through 6, here is how Moses records an event that his brother had an unfortunate hand in, literally. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, right? So we're at Mount Sinai at this point. Moses and the Lord are having this goings on regarding the giving of the law, declaring to the people what it is, right? What is it to live righteously? When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron. Right, so they go to Moses' brother Aaron and said to him, "Up! Aaron, wake up." I think he's in his tent, and dude's sleeping, and you're knocking on the door. Hey, Aaron, wake up. Wake up. Make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So Aaron said to them, "Take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." Right, so what a bizarre scene this must have been, because up to this point, what has the Lord been doing? He has been leading the people in a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud. He has been doing this. He has been going before them. He has stretched out his righteous right hand, and he has split the Red Sea for the people to walk across, and he has covered the armies of Egypt after them. He has provided for them countless times. And because it's taken a little bit too long, they don't get what they want. So read into this. This is the preference, right? We want something there to justify our wants, right? The desires we have that are not subordinate to God. So we will go to the brother of Moses who is speaking with the Lord on the mountain, and we're going to go to him and say, "Hey, Aaron, dude, we got this idea. You remember our neighbors? Remember our neighbors in Egypt? Egypt was a great place, wasn't it, Aaron? It was a great. Remember we had the cucumbers and the garlic and the leeks and the meat. Remember that? Remember we had all this great food? It's not great out here. I think the reason why is because they had these things they worshipped, these little images. Aaron, man, it's time. We gotta get one too." So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord," right? So there's the real craziness with this, is that they wanted to attach the Lord's name, as it were, to this image. Because they thought, well, we can manipulate this. This pillar of fire, this pillar of cloud, we can't manipulate that. But if we call this calf the Lord, then we can do this, right? We got this. And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. And so you see here, it's like this glorious God. They've determined we want glory. We still want to worship. But we want to worship something that we can manipulate. We want to worship something that's going to give us what we want, because we see people around us getting things that they want, and we want that too. So covet. Let's make something that we can manipulate so we can get it. I mentioned this the other week, but I do think it bears mentioning again. As the Lord is speaking through Jeremiah to the people of Judah, "Has a nation changed its gods, even though they are no gods? But my people have changed their glory for that which does not profit. Be appalled, O heavens, at this. Be shocked, be utterly desolate, declares the Lord. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water." All right, this is what we do. We exchange it. Right, there's an exchange that takes place. This is what sin is, what rebellion against God is. It's to say, I'm going to exchange that which is good and perfect and all-satisfying for something that I think is better. Right? We think there's glory. We think there's greatness. We think there is worth and value to be had, ultimate worth, ultimate value in these other things. And so we want to exchange it. We want to say, I don't want this. I want this instead. Yet the Bible presents us with a very clear picture of how God, in this messed up, bankrupt pursuit of other glories, how God reveals his glory so that glory seekers, glory thieves can be reclaimed and be satisfied with the glory that was from the beginning. Here's what we find in John chapter 12. Though we'd done so many signs before them, they still not believe in him. Talking about Jesus and the Jewish leaders. They saw all these things that were happening. Jesus had done these things. He demonstrated clearly he is, right? He said repeatedly, "I am. The Lord is here, the glorious one." So that the word spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. "Lord, who has believed what he heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? Therefore they could not believe, for again Isaiah said, he has blinded their eyes and hardened their heart, lest they see with their eyes and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them." Again, it's patently obvious, very clearly perceived, and yet they loved their sin. Here is how John then comments and helps us understand what's the glory aspect here. Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke of him. Isaiah saw the glory of Jesus and spoke of him. He is extolling the glory of Christ as he is speaking like this is a glorious God. Isaiah chapter 6, where we find this. This is what John is referring to. But now this statement that is made, I think, is helpful when we want to kind of personalize this glory pursuit, and then we turn the page to consider how Jesus reorients so that we can be satisfied in a glory that is not going to fail. "Nevertheless, many even of the authorities believed in him, but for fear of the Pharisees." All right, so saying believed in him, we're not necessarily talking saving. We're talking like people, yeah, Jesus seems good. "Fear of the Pharisees, they did not confess it, so that they would not be put out of the synagogue, for they love the glory that comes from man more than the glory that comes from God." This is just how we can summarize sin. How we summarize rebellion against God. I love this glory more than this. And then we find this, and this is what we'll finish with this morning. This is the prologue to John's gospel, and he is helping us understand who is Jesus, why has Jesus come. "The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world." Speaking of Christ, "He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory. Glory is of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, 'This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me because he was before me,'" right? This is the God who is taking on flesh. The glorious and awesome God taking on flesh. For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace, for the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. God, the only Son, who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. So what has happened in history then is that this glorious God, whose glory has been regularly traded out for all the things that he has made, what he has done is in the person of his Son, he has taken on human flesh and he has dwelt among us, right? So people ask questions like, well, if God is real, why doesn't he show himself? He did. He did. The glorious God humbled himself, taking on the form of a servant, and in becoming obedient to the point of death, gave himself up so that his people might be redeemed. So that we, who at one point preferred another glory, we who at one point loved ourselves so much that we would have denied anything that was obvious to us that suggested that there is a God who is great and glorious and he deserves all of our worship, that this God has entered history in the person of Jesus Christ, and he has done something so that we who would prefer another glory, who deserve eternal punishment because of that. Or you think, what's the most abominable thing you could ever do? Is to offend an infinitely perfect God. It's the most terrible thing you could ever do. And yet this God, out of love for rebellious sinners, gives his Son, who lives perfectly in the place of his people, who dies in the place of his people, so that those who would trust in that work, who would say, there is no glory to be found here anymore, there is nothing in my heart that is worthy of ultimate trust, there is nothing in this world that will satisfy me apart from the God who made me, I yield. I am bankrupt, and my eyes are now turned to see that you are great, and you are glorious, and you are awesome. That's what Jesus came to do, so that we can have our worship reoriented and glory is put back in order, so that you can look at the world around you and say, this is created. It's created for my good, but it isn't created for me to worship. I have been redeemed. I've been reconciled. I've been restored to the God who made me, whom at one point I preferred anything in front of him. And now my heart has been made new. This is good news of the gospel that stands for people who would exchange immortal, invisible, only wise God glory for something as foolish as $50.